You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, The Telegraph reports that MP and former veteran Johnny Mercer may face jail time as he continues to decline to cooperate with requests into an official inquiry about unlawful killings and executions of Afghans between 2010 and 2013. The Guardian reports on the Diane Abbott race row, with unions representing GPs and health workers insisting that Tory donor Frank Hester lose his NHS contracts. The Mail features an alleged Tory party plot to unite behind Penny Mordaunt and replace Rishi Sunak as leader. Church playing race card, that's on the front of the Times, as the government's former race czar criticises the Church of England's £1 billion slavery reparation fund. The Express leads with Chancellor Jeremy Hunt responding to criticisms that he's neglected pensioners in last week's budget. The FT leads on TikTok hitting $16 billion in sales in the US as the House of Representatives passed a bill that could ban the app nationwide. The Mirror reports on the story of a British grandmother who's been in jail for 11 years and could face the death penalty in Indonesia. The Eye leads with an investigation into how thousands of food delivery accounts are being sold into the black market. The partial closure of the M25 and the chaos that could follow is on the front page of The Sun. And The Star features a story about beavers appearing in parts of Cornwall where they've never been seen before. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Wallis Simons. Welcome again to both of you. Let us start with the Times World, pages 36 and 37, and the polling stations that have opened in Russia. There are elections taking place. Foregone conclusion, I think I'm safe in saying, who might win those elections. But there has been some surprising dissent to see in Russia on this occasion. Jake?
Yes, that's right. Vladimir Putin, 71 years old, has been president since 2000, apart from 4 years where he was prime minister, but still kind of holding the reins. And he has changed the laws a few years ago to enable him to serve term after term until 2036, which would make him the longest-serving Russian leader, even longer than Stalin, 6 years longer than Stalin.
Longer for some sons, I think.
But clearly the Russian people, not all of them are entirely on board with this. There's been pockets of sabotage around the country. There's been ink poured into ballot boxes, green antiseptic poured into ballot boxes. There's been a couple of petrol bomb attacks and arson attacks and one unexploded IED which went off outside a polling station. 8 people have been arrested. So the frustration with President Putin is being felt in Russia, particularly after Alexei Navalny's strange death, mysterious death a few weeks ago, and amid the war in Ukraine. And yet he's going to win, in all likelihood, and he's got a lot of support as well.
But Susie, do you think that a corner has been turned in that we are seeing this open dissent from Russians as much as they can dissent?
No, because there isn't nearly enough of it to make any difference. There are independent think tanks who've been polling in Russia throughout Putin's reign, pretty much. And so you're able to see over time, although obviously the situation in Russia and the government polling is completely not to be believed, they can sort of chart at the very least at peaks and troughs in public opinion in Russia. And his opinion polls at the moment are at 86% approval. But most interestingly, 75% of the Russian public think Russia's going in the right direction, and that is despite it being one of the most sanctioned countries on earth. Now, in 2022, when he invaded Ukraine, the sanctions were so bad you had companies like Zara and H&M and Chanel and others pulling out of Russia because of the sanctions. Well, and there were malls that were empty and people were complaining about it, but now those malls have been refilled with rip-off versions of the same. One of the most popular drinks in Russia is a 4 form of Coca-Cola that's, you know, known as cool cola because it's the good cola and it's not there, and it tastes almost the same. And those malls are full again. The economy in Russia is doing OK. They've got a lot of resources and they're able to sell lots of oil, which is going out there, whether the sanctions like it or not. And so long as that economy keeps going, the people that are really feeling the bite from the war are many in rural, poorer communities who are less likely, they're not as far more dispersed than in cities and are less likely to get together and start protesting and also compare notes on what's happening.
Do you trust those positive polls entirely?
I don't trust them entirely, but I do trust the ups and downs being roughly charted. I think he is at a peak at the moment, despite the fact 2 years on, you know, we were supposed to have taken over Ukraine very, very quickly. He's not. He's bogged down. He's heavily sanctioned, he's ostracised, he's survived a massive military coup, which should make him very shaky. And he's killed Navalny.
Did you manage to glean any indication as to when the troughs were and time-wise?
No, I didn't, sorry. But there have been times when he wasn't doing as well. I think it maybe dropped to the all-time low of something like 50-60% approval, which any Western leader would kill for. But, you know, one of the things he's doing is when there is a family that has lost someone at the front, they're getting a massive compensation payout, which is, you know, £50,000-60,000, which is coming out of Russian reserves. Now, so long as the economy keeps going, so long as he can keep funding and paying off people, that reduces the possibility of dissent because it makes people feel recognised and valued. And so, you know, the only thing that's really going to affect Putin probably is if the international oil price collapses and then he can't keep paying out from reserves, he can't keep the economy as healthy as it is in Russia at the moment. It's arguably doing better than we are. And then he's got a real problem. But at the moment, he's fairly buoyant. And he's at like 80% of the polls. I think the main contender, who's someone who he's allowed to go on the ballot, is at 6%. You know, he's never going to get anywhere.
I heard someone today saying that the only way that leadership is going to change is when he leaves this mortal coil. Do you think that's probably the most accurate prediction?
That does look very likely. But
I think it's the same in America, isn't it? Well,
but I think you're very right to bring out the distinction between the rural constituencies and the urban ones. You know, a lot of the people who are Muscovites, who are from the big cities, have left, or they left immediately after the beginning of the war, the people who would oppose Putin. And in the rural constituencies, you would normally have people who would be more keen to support Putin, but they're being hammered by the war a lot more than the other people are. So it's quite an unstable time, I think, socially in Russia, but I don't think unstable enough to topple Putin anytime soon.
It's still got a very tenuous grip on power, but he's still got that grip.
Susie, to the Mail, are we going to see Penny Mordaunt called up, not to the army, but to the position of a leader of the Conservative Party?
Good God. Good God. It's got to this point. It's got to the point where there are people having talks in Westminster bars, which get reported as actual news, that Penny Mordaunt, who is the leader of the House, who's in charge of basically organising the agenda for what we're discussing every day, who is renowned, really, for being a failed contestant on the reality show Splash.
And holding a sword.
And holding a sword.
At the
and having lovely, nice, thick gold hair that I'm very jealous of, that she might be leader, but only on the basis of 100 days. I mean, you get a double Liz Truss out of her, that's it. And the deal would be...
How many lettuces would you get out of her? That's the question.
Would the lettuce even make... But you'd have 100 days where she would come in, and then immediately call a general election, would somehow be a promise which is entirely not possible to hold anyone to. And this is cloud cuckoo land from a party which is rotting from the head down. We've had the third minister in Sunak's government in 18 months so far, who's resigned, not to go and do anything in particular, just anywhere but here. You know, and if a minister's doing that...
Yes. Jake, same story on the front of the Telegraph.
That's right. I mean, it's difficult to think in what world the answer to Tory woes could be Penny Mordaunt. I mean, don't forget, at the last leadership election, which seems like a million years ago, which Liz Truss won, she didn't do very well. She rather crashed and burned amid questions about the veracity and length of her service in the Royal Navy. Also, the comments that she made in the House of Commons, where she said that a trans woman is a woman, which did not go down well with core Tory voters, and will still come back to bite her because it's on tape and there's not much she can do about it. I don't think that she has the charisma or the leadership qualities to pull the party together, let alone the country. But it shows the desperation of the party. They just hope that Penny Mordaunt, with that sword, the sword bounce, I suppose, they hope will allow the Tories to cut through to Middle England.
She's destined to be our great leader because she held the sword aloft. It's not how it works, lads.
To The Guardian, we've only got a couple of minutes, but I do want to get this story in regarding Frank Hester and the unions basically saying that he should lose his NHS contracts off the back of him calling for or suggesting that Diane Abbott should be shot. Yeah,
much as in football, there is a fit and proper person test for NHS contracts. Who knew? Michelle Mone obviously didn't. But they're saying that he would not complete that. He would not pass that test. Interestingly, they're also saying in here that Rishi Sunak has refused to say how many times exactly he's met Frank Hester since he started making these donations. The Guardian's listed quite a few of them. There's at least half a dozen. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if Downing Street is refusing to say how many times something has happened, it's not because they didn't write it down, they don't know. It's because there's a lot. It's the answer.
I mean, I wonder about this fit and proper person test because, I mean, obviously his remarks were deplorable and nobody would ever defend that. But that's one remark out of an entire life. Now, it could be that his whole life was riddled with racism, in which case he isn't a fit and proper person. But it could be that actually it was some kind of aberration from his general standards of behaviour, and we just don't know. The way that he's been treated in such a toxic way, every single picture's been gone through, whoever's standing next to him is being pilloried for ever standing next to him in the past. I worry slightly about the way in which he's been sort of cast into this really deeply evil character with no sense of redemption at all.
I mean, what he said was deeply evil.
Of course it was, and as I said, as I said, I'm not defending that, and I say, you know, I'm open to the possibility it could be characteristic of
violence.
Him. Absolutely, I'm not defending it. All I'm saying is that I think that to adjudicate whether he's a fit and proper person, you need to look at his whole life and his character and his business dealings and how he's been in his life, rather than just his one comment.
There have been some employees of his, admittedly probably no longer employees of his, who have come forward and said that this is habitual kind of thing, and that it's not really cricket at all in any way. But I'm just more interested in the fact that, you know, we've got a Prime Minister who finds it absolutely impossible to say what racism is when it's right smack bang in front of him, and when he has come out and told us he's going to defeat racism with his trusty sword of truth and justice. It's like, well, here you are, mate. Here's your best chance. There you go. You said, literally, like the other Friday night, you came out of Downing Street, out of your own house, and you said you were going to fix this. Here you go. No, not this bit, not the £10 million bit. No, I need to keep that.
OK. Susie and Jake, thank you much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, responding to criticisms that he's neglected pensioners in last week's budget. That on the front of the Express. We'll be back with that story and others. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Jake Wallis Simons. Let's take a look at the front of the Daily Express, in which we read that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is trying to make it up to pensioners. How so, Susie?
By more mad Corbyn-esque economics. So what the government has suggested, they will scrap national insurance, which brings in about £46 billion a year. Labour has said, well, what are you going to do to fill that gap then? And they haven't said. But what Jeremy Hunt said, that he's going to protect... Although pensioners did feel that they actually took quite a big hit in the budget last week because of fiscal drag, they're getting pulled into more income tax brackets and so on, and they don't benefit from the national insurance cut, that he would keep the triple lock in pensions, which is the guarantee that every year it goes up by average earnings growth, inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is the greater. But this is like the kind of thing. If Jeremy Corbyn had said this a few years ago, I'm going to scrap this £46 billion tax and I'm still going to raise the amount that you're getting in benefits somehow, and never said how to do it, the Tories would have destroyed them. It's a mad, just bit of imaginary maths.
Well, I think voters...
And there's no timeline for getting rid of national insurance.
No, and I think voters feel this as well, because the national insurance announcement was supposed to move the polls in the Tories' favour, and it didn't, because everyone knows that the tax burden is the highest since whatever it is, 1948. And we don't fall for it, frankly. And Tory voters, you know, want lower taxes across the board. They want to feel it in their pockets. They don't want some sleight of hand that isn't going to make them feel any richer. And, you know, Rachel Reeves came out and responded to the national insurance announcement by saying, well, that money pays for the pensions and for a bit of the NHS. And so Hunt is just coming back and saying, well, I'll find the money somewhere else, because he doesn't want to lose the pensioners' vote, which is an important Tory constituency.
To appease them. They are supposedly natural Conservative voters, aren't they? Let's have a look at the Mirror, 1 in 5 Tory MPs want a May election, but they're not going to get one, are they?
Well, Rishi Sunak has said that there won't be a general election on May the 2nd when there are locals. But he also said that there'd be a government of integrity, professionalism and accountability, and there'd be flights to Rwanda, and that he would definitely deal with racism. So who knows if we can trust what he has to say?
He's not going to U-turn on that.
Who knows? U-turn on everything else. I wouldn't bank against it. I think he's going to have some very sticky days between here and then, but he's got to call it, I think, next week if he's going to do it at all. So we haven't got long to wait.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's been an exodus of Tory MPs already. 62 MPs have announced they're going to step down at the next election, including Theresa May, the ex-Lord Chancellor Brandon Lewis, and now the Armed Forces Minister James Happy, who isn't very at the moment, I would suggest. And the Tories, the 1 in 5 Tories who want a May election, the general spirit is, please God, make it stop, put us out of our misery earlier rather than later.
I've got a villa to get to, and I've got quail to shoot.
And I think that, you know, if the Tories are going to avoid a complete wipeout, Sunak does need to turn some kind of morale around to some extent. This is bad news for the Tories. You can't get any kind of decent result with feeling like that in the ranks.
Yeah, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey, as you say, became the 62nd Conservative MP to say that he will step down. What did you think of the Labour gimmick today with the chicken?
They've nicked
Rishi
it off
Sunak?
us, and we'd like our chicken soup back, please, Keir.
Oh, really?
Yeah, must have nicked it off us. But it's interesting that James Heappey's the third minister, the third serving minister, who hasn't just been fired or resigned for a personal reason or something else has come along or been reshuffled. He's leaving politics. He's not just saying, I don't want to do this job anymore, or I've got an issue of principle, I'm going to step down. He's resigning from politics totally. So he's right there, the top of their game, if you like. And the third minister's gone, do you know what? I'm out.
But what
Can't
it means
be doing
is that there's huge numbers of voters on the right, probably the majority of Britons actually, who have nowhere to go, and hence the looming threat of reform. But probably the electoral system will prevent them from making any serious
also,
marriage.
these MPs who are quitting now are leaving it so late, really running up to the date of whenever an election's going to be, whether it's now or in the autumn. It's very, very quick. And so Heappey's constituency association has to pick someone to be his replacement candidate 6 months after they wanted to have selected someone. And that person will have no recognition in the constituency, won't be able to do much campaigning, no one will know who they are. Maybe that'll actually be a benefit in the climate we've got at the moment. Just put a blue rosette on something and see if they get anywhere. And hopefully the embarrassment won't stick, you know, when you all get trounced.
And Jake, do you think this points to a general sense of disillusionment with politics? In terms of the politicians?
In terms of the politicians, well, it hasn't been a good... I mean, apart from the news that the politicians have got a pay rise, 91 grand now, rather than, was it, up by about 5 grand, that's the only bit of good news they've had. They've had a lot of stress with the intimidation outside Parliament a few weeks ago and the headlines about the end of democracy or threats to democracy. And Tories in particular, I mean, I think the Labour side are probably feeling quite optimistic and unified, but the Tory side, you know, there's stress upon stress, and with there's such bleak prospects on the horizon, it can't be good for their mental health.
Yeah, good point.
I think they're the ones who are disillusioned with politics more than the rest of us.
Susie and Jake, thank you both. We shall see you in the 11 o'clock hour. Let's take a look at the weather in the meantime.